I had seen enough death by then to know when someone was about to die. The eyes become quiet first, not afraid, not angry, just still, like a pond that stops remembering the wind. That day, I wasn't ready to watch one more life leave. Not like that. Not after what we had just done to the village, but as I walked through the smoke, rifle lowered and ears ringing, I saw her, barefoot, shaking, holding a child that wouldn't stop crying. She looked young, too young to be carrying that kind of weight. Her dress was torn, her hands were dirty, but her spine was straight like she'd made peace with something long before I arrived. I raised my weapon out of reflex. Orders were still echoing in my head. Clear the hills, secure the perimeter, no hesitation, but she didn't flinch, she didn't beg, she didn't even blink. Instead, she pointed. Her fingers trembled like a broken tree branch, and she pointed past me, past the ruins, toward the hills. Her lips moved, but no words came out, just a sound like air escaping a cracked pipe. I turned to look where she was pointing, and I swear my blood turned cold. There were figures, barely visible, moving in the tree line, slow, calculated, watching us. They were too far to shoot, but too close to ignore. I lowered my rifle. She wasn't warning me for her sake. She was saving us. That moment haunts me more than the firefight that came next, because sometimes, in war, mercy is louder than bullets. And that woman, in silence, screamed louder than any commander I ever had. The war had changed by the time we reached that part of the valley. Command called it a clean-up operation, but none of us believed that. We'd already lost too many good men to snipers, landmines, and ambushes. Villages we passed through were hollow, like the bones of something that once lived, now sun-bleached and brittle. Still, we pushed forward, step by step, pretending we knew why we were there. I was a lieutenant, expected to lead. But the truth is, I was just a tired man in a uniform, following orders that didn't make sense anymore. My unit was down to 12. We were ghosts moving through the hills of Korea, trying not to make noise, trying not to think. We slept in shifts, ate when we could, and joked about going home even though none of us believed it would happen. We were strangers to ourselves. Good men turned silent, hardened by too many goodbyes. That day, I had a feeling in my gut that wouldn't leave, like something was waiting for us, something quiet and final. It wasn't just the enemy we feared, it was the silence after the battle, the questions you ask yourself when your hands stop shaking. Did I do the right thing? Was there another way? That kind of silence can drown you faster than a bullet. I carried that silence into every village, every home, every decision I made. And now I want to ask you, have you ever felt something was wrong, even before anything happened? That weight in your chest, like time is about to split in half. If you're feeling this story already, hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and tell me, from what country and city are you listening right now? I want to know who's walking with me through this. The village didn't have doors, not one. The houses were still standing, but every frame was hollow, wide open like mouths mid-scream. I remember thinking, did they flee in a hurry or never intend to come back? The sun hung low, barely cutting through the haze. I told Corporal Reeves to fan out and check the left side, while I moved down the center with 3 men behind me. No birds, no dogs, just wind dragging ash along the ground like whispers we weren't meant to hear. Private Yates found a broken radio. No batteries, no signal. Just the smell of burned plastic and something sour beneath it. Rot, maybe, or fear. I didn't say anything. I just kept walking. The further we moved into the village, the more wrong it felt. It wasn't destroyed like the others. No signs of shelling, no bullet holes. Just emptied. Like someone had come and taken the people without leaving a scratch on the walls. That kind of silence, it doesn't feel like peace. It feels like a trap. Then we saw the first signs. A pair of shoes left neatly by a doorway. A bowl of rice, untouched. A baby's toy made of twigs, still swaying slightly, as if someone had just left it. That's when Sergeant Lyle muttered, "They didn't run. They vanished." I looked back at him and saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen since Incheon. Fear that wasn't tied to bullets or fire, but to something invisible. I felt it too, like we were being watched not with hatred, but with expectation. I gave the signal to hold positions and crouched by one of the huts. I peeled back a fraying curtain and found a fire pit still warm. Not hot, warm. Someone had been there minutes before us, and they hadn't taken anything. It was like they wanted us to find it this way. I called in for aerial recon, but the radios crackled with dead space. No confirmation, no backup, just us and the hills staring back. That's when I noticed her, standing in the doorway of the last house, arms wrapped tight around her chest. She was barefoot, face smudged with soot, and her eyes locked on mine as if she'd been waiting just for me. She didn't run, didn't speak, just stood there like a statue. My boots crunched loud in the dirt as I stepped closer. Every part of me screamed, "Wait! Wait for the others. Check the perimeter, stay smart." But I didn't. I walked straight toward her like something else had taken over. I was 10 feet away when I noticed the child in her arms. Small, too quiet. No tears, no whimpering. That silence again, loud in my ears. I lowered my rifle just a little, enough to show her I wasn't going to shoot. That's when she raised her hand, slowly, with all the trembling weight of someone carrying a memory too heavy, and pointed. Not at me, not at the men behind me. She pointed past us, toward the hills. At first I didn't turn. I wanted to keep my eyes on her to see if she'd run or collapse or beg, but she didn't do any of that. She just kept pointing. So I turned, and that's when I saw them. Movement. Subtle, shadowed just beyond the ridgeline. Figures watching, not fleeing, not attacking, just watching. It was enough to freeze my breath mid-chest. I turned back to her, but she was gone, like smoke. I shouted for the men to regroup, to take cover. We scattered into positions, but no gunfire came. The figures in the hills didn't move closer, didn't shout, just vanished into the trees. The men were on edge, fingers twitching on triggers. Reeves asked if we should pursue. I said no, and I'm still not sure why. Maybe it was her face, maybe it was the way she didn't blink, maybe it was the way she pointed. Not with anger, but with warning. We stayed in that village overnight, posted guards, checked every building twice, nothing. No signs of a trap, no supplies to gather, no enemy combatants. Just a dozen soldiers sleeping with one eye open, dreaming of women who point and don't speak. I lay awake under the stars, staring at the hills. I couldn't shake the thought, why didn't they attack? Why show themselves at all? And more than that, why was she helping us? The next morning, I walked to the same hut. It was empty, just like before. But something was different. A small strip of white cloth lay at the doorway, tied into a knot. I picked it up. It smelled like smoke and rice and something else. Something human. A message, maybe. Or a farewell. I tucked it into my pocket and told no one. Not then. But I felt it. That morning was the start of something I couldn't explain. A fracture in the rhythm of war. That woman didn't just survive. She intervened. And whatever was waiting in those hills, it wasn't finished with us yet. We moved out at dawn. The kind of dawn that doesn't warm you. Cold light slipping through the trees like it's afraid to touch the ground. No songs, no chatter, just the rhythmic crunch of boots against frost. I kept the cloth she left me tucked in my breast pocket. I told myself it was just fabric, just another oddity in a war full of ghosts. But every time my hand brushed it, I remembered her eyes. Not frightened, not pleading, certain. That certainty unsettled me more than any rifle ever had. Our orders were vague. Sweep the ridge, confirm reports of movement, secure the high ground. I hated those words. Secure the high ground. Like it was just terrain, not memory, not blood. I split the men into 3 units, standard flanking spread. Lyle took the left ridge. Reeves went right with the radio op. I led center. As we climbed, the trees thinned and the wind grew bolder. There were no birds here, just brittle branches and the sound of our breathing, loud and wrong in a place that wanted silence. Halfway up, we found the first sign, a tripwire made of fishing line, primitive but clean. I stopped Yates before he could trigger it. "This isn't random," I whispered. "They want us to find it." He nodded but said nothing. We cut the line and kept moving, eyes wider now, fingers tighter on triggers. The trees seemed to lean in, watching. I swear I heard something. Not a voice, not a sound. More like a pressure, a question in the air. "Why are you here? What do you want?" I didn't have answers, I just had orders. We reached a clearing, perfect view of the valley, perfect spot to die. That's when we saw them again, the figures, closer this time. Maybe a dozen, maybe more. Camouflaged in brush, motionless. Their rifles were lowered. I felt Lyle's breath hitch in my earpiece. "Do we engage?" he whispered. My lips were dry. My heart thundered like a drum from some ancient ceremony I wasn't supposed to be part of. I said no, again. I didn't know why, but something about their stillness felt deliberate, almost diplomatic. Then, from the tree line to our left, came a sound, a branch snapping, sharp and clear. We turned, guns raised. But it wasn't the enemy. It was a child, thin, alone, no more than 7 or 8. Dirt on his face, a torn scarf around his neck. He stumbled into view like he'd walked through a nightmare and didn't wake up. My men froze. No one spoke. The child looked up at me and pointed, just like the woman, same direction, same hills. His eyes were swollen but dry. I stepped forward slowly, lowering my weapon. "Are you hurt?" I asked. He didn't answer, just pointed again. Behind him, the figures in the trees didn't move. I knelt, held out my hand. He stepped back. Then he spoke. One word, quiet, broken but clear. "Boom!" He pointed again, and this time I understood. A trap. A mine. An ambush. Something was there. Something that didn't care if it killed soldiers or children. He was warning us, like her. I radioed Reeves, told him to halt movement. Lyle held position. I scanned the terrain where the child had pointed and saw it, just beneath a fallen branch, a glint of metal, too smooth to be natural. I motioned for the team to stay back and crawled forward. One glance confirmed it. A buried shell, wired and primed. One more step and we'd be shrapnel. My throat clenched. I disarmed it, slowly, carefully, then marked the spot. There were more. We found 5 that morning. The boy was gone when I returned, vanished like the woman. Like the silence swallowed him whole. We cleared the hill, found nothing else, no signs of a camp, but that didn't matter. They knew we were coming. They watched, and instead of killing us, they warned us. I couldn't process that. War isn't mercy. War is blood and rules and loss. But this was something else. Something human beneath the uniforms and hate. We regrouped near a rocky outcrop and debriefed. I told the men what we'd found. Lyle was quiet. Reeves looked shaken. "Why would they help us?" he asked. No one had an answer. That night I sat by the fire, the cloth in my hand again, and I remembered something my father once told me. Sometimes your enemy isn't who you think it is. Sometimes the war is inside you. I didn't understand that as a boy, but I was starting to now. Before I slept, I climbed a few yards away, stood at the edge of the cliff, looking down at the valley we'd marched through. It looked so peaceful from above. No bodies, no smoke, just earth, trees, wind. I wondered how many villages we'd passed through, how many faces we'd forgotten, how many warnings we missed. The enemy wasn't always holding a gun. Sometimes they held a child, or pointed without a word, or disappeared just after saving your life. The wind howled that night, not like a scream, more like a question, one I couldn't yet answer. But I felt it circling me, digging into my bones. I thought about the woman again, and the boy, and the way they had looked at me, not with hatred, with hope, or maybe with a test. And I wondered what they saw in me. A soldier, a killer, or just a man trying to survive something bigger than he could understand. We were supposed to head back to base the next day. I gave the order at sunrise, but nobody moved. Not really. The bodies obeyed, the boots walked, but the minds, they stayed on that hill. Every rustling branch became a threat. Every echo in the valley below felt like footsteps behind us. The men were unraveling in silence, and I knew it because I was too. I kept seeing her, not as a ghost, more like a memory that refused to fade. Her face, her finger pointing, that impossible calm in a world built on screaming. 3 hours into our descent, Private Donnelly stopped. He didn't say a word, just stared at the tree line to our left. I turned, saw nothing. I asked what he saw. He just shook his head and muttered, "They're following." Not attacking, not speaking, following. I didn't argue. Truth was, I felt it too. A presence, like air held too long in the lungs. I ordered a 5-minute halt. We crouched, listened. Nothing but the wind, and beneath it something like breathing that didn't belong to us. When we reached the village again, it looked smaller. Or maybe we were just bigger, changed, burned on the inside. I told the men to rest, eat, regroup. But they sat in silence, fingers twitching, backs against cold walls. I checked the hut where I'd seen the woman, still empty, still quiet, but something was different. On the floor was a pattern in the ash, not footprints, not letters, just a swirling mark like a spiral drawn by a fingertip. I knelt beside it, touched the edge. It wasn't recent, and yet it hadn't been there when we left. That night we were ambushed, not by rifles, not by bombs, by voices. The first scream came from Donnelly. He woke clawing at the ground, sobbing, said he saw children, eyes hollow, arms reaching. I tried to calm him. Then Reeves screamed. He pointed to the wall, said someone was inside it, watching. The rest began shouting. Lyle fired his weapon into the dirt. I grabbed his arm, shouted for order, but nothing helped. Panic spread like fire through dry grass. The whole platoon caught in a storm they couldn't touch. I pulled them outside, into the night, made them see the stars, told them to breathe. We stood there, 13 soldiers lit by moonlight, trembling like boys. Slowly, the chaos died down, but nobody slept. I took first watch. The cloth in my pocket felt heavier that night. I pulled it out, unwrapped it. Inside was a single strand of black hair tied in a knot. I stared at it for a long time, then tucked it back and said nothing. At dawn, a scout from another unit arrived. Said command wanted updates. Said no enemy movement had been confirmed in our sector. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I realized something then. Command didn't know what we were fighting. They thought war was bodies and bullets, but out here it was something else, something older, something that watched from the hills and walked in our dreams. The scout looked confused when I refused to leave. "We've done our job," he said. "Time to rotate." I said no. Told him we weren't finished. Not yet. He left, muttering something about shell shock. Maybe he was right. But I couldn't walk away from that village. Not while the silence still had weight. Not while the marks in the ash still changed when no one was looking. That night I went alone to the top of the hill. No weapons, no backup, just me and the cold. I stood beneath the twisted pine where I first saw the shapes. Waited. Hours passed. Then I heard it. Not footsteps, not breathing. A cry. Soft, human. I followed the sound into the trees, and there, sitting on a stump, was the child, the same one, eyes hollow, hands bleeding. He held out something wrapped in cloth. I took it. Inside was a photograph, faded, torn. A woman holding a baby, smiling. The same eyes, the same mouth. It was her and the boy. I looked up, but he was gone. Again. No footsteps, no goodbye, just trees. I stared at the photo until my fingers went numb. Then I understood. They weren't ghosts. They were memories, warnings, sent to protect the one thing war tries hardest to erase, truth. I returned to camp and gathered the men, told them what I saw. Some believed me, some didn't matter. We stayed 3 more nights, No ambush came, no enemy. But every night we heard the cries, we saw shapes move, and by the end, every man believed something lived in those hills that had nothing to do with politics or borders. We left at last, quietly, the village behind us, the truth inside us. I carried the photo the whole way, never told command, never filed a report, just walked. And every time I thought of that woman, I remembered how her silence spoke louder than my rank ever could. We returned to base with our uniforms intact, our rifles cleaned, and our minds in pieces. The other platoons clapped us on the back, offered cigarettes and jokes, but their smiles fell short when they looked in our eyes. They could tell. We weren't the same men who had marched out a week earlier. Something in us had gone quiet, not broken, just rewired. I still wore my lieutenant's bars, still saluted the flag, but deep down, I knew. I had left part of myself on that hill, in her eyes, in the silence she carried like a weapon. Command asked for a briefing. I gave them one. The official kind, terrain descriptions, enemy sightings, suspected mines. I left out the spiral in the ash, the black hair in the cloth, the boy in the trees. I didn't know how to explain those things without sounding mad, or worse, poetic. War didn't want poetry, it wanted numbers. We gave them coordinates, not confessions. And so, the story of what happened on that hill was folded into a manila folder, filed under low engagement sector, and buried deeper than any mine we had found. But war doesn't care where you are. It follows you. It chews at your thoughts when your hands are idle. In the weeks that followed, 2 of my men asked for transfers. One started going to chapel every morning, whispering prayers in languages I didn't understand. Another, Donnelly, began drawing spirals on the walls of his bunk, over and over, like he was trying to remember something his brain had lost. I didn't stop him, couldn't. I was doing the same thing, in my head, drawing her hand pointing, replaying the boy's quiet warning, wondering what we left behind, or what we had brought back with us. Then came the letter. It wasn't stamped or routed through military channels, just placed on my bunk one night, folded clean, no name. Inside, a message in pencil. The woman was seen again, by the river. She waits. No signature, no proof, just handwriting that trembled with urgency. I stared at it for hours, took it to my CO. He laughed it off, said it was probably a joke, but I knew better. I could feel it in my bones. The war wasn't done with me. She wasn't done with me. I made the decision quietly, took a week's leave, told them I needed air, mountains, peace. No one questioned me. Maybe they saw it coming. Maybe they'd seen the same things in the dark. I packed light, no rifle, just a pistol, a canteen, and the photo the boy gave me. I returned to the valley alone. The roads had changed, the frost was heavier, but the trees remembered me. They creaked when I passed, leaned the same way, whispered in the same wind. When I reached the village, it was even emptier than before. She wasn't there, not at first. I sat in the same hut, waited. Night fell, no cries, no footsteps, only the fire I built, and the sound of my breath. Then, just before dawn, I saw her, across the field, standing in the exact spot where she first pointed. She wasn't older, wasn't younger, just still. Her arms were empty this time, no child, no cry, just that stare that burned through orders, ranks, years. I rose slowly, heart thudding so hard it hurt. I walked to her without thinking, like before. She didn't speak, but her lips moved. One word, over and over. I couldn't hear it, not in sound, but I felt it. It was the name of someone I had forgotten. A name from a different part of the war. One I hadn't spoken since the early months. A boy I couldn't save. A choice I made in a firefight that left 3 dead. My knees buckled. She stepped forward, placed her hand on my chest, right above the cloth in my pocket, and closed her eyes. And then I heard it. A scream, far off, from the hills. Not pain, not fear, a warning. I turned toward it, and when I looked back, she was gone. Again. But something had shifted. The ground beneath my boots felt warmer, the air smelled like rice and ash and something alive. I stood there until the sun came up, then walked into the forest where the scream had come from. What I found changed everything. There was a camp, buried, hidden beneath brush and earth, not military, refugees, survivors, half-starved, silent but alive. Children, women, 2 old men with bandaged legs. I counted 23. They stared at me like I was the ghost. I offered food, water, they didn't move, but one child stepped forward, a girl, maybe 9. She reached into her pocket and handed me a torn photo, the same photo I already had. Only this one had me in it. In the background, rifle slung, blurred but unmistakable. I dropped to my knees. She had shown me the future, or the past, or maybe just a possibility. That's what she was guarding, not a trap, but a thread, a line that connected the living and the dead, mercy and memory. And somehow I had been chosen to carry it forward. I brought them out one by one. No one tried to stop me. I had no orders, no clearance, no backup. Just my name, my hands, and a promise I hadn't spoken aloud, not even to myself. The refugees moved like shadows in the morning light, quiet, unsure if they were waking into safety or another nightmare. I didn't rush them. I didn't speak much. I just pointed toward the road I'd come down, held the photo tight in my fist, and walked. They followed like they'd been waiting their whole lives for someone to say, "It's time." We reached the checkpoint by dusk. The guards raised their rifles until they saw my face, my uniform, my eyes. I said nothing, just stepped aside and let the villagers pass. No one questioned me, not that day. Maybe it was the way the little girl held my sleeve, maybe it was the photograph I kept clutched in my hand, or maybe, and this is what I believe, the war had taken enough, and somewhere, something had decided. Not this time. The medics came. The reports were filed. The villagers were taken in, given blankets, rice, names on a clipboard. I stood to the side watching it all, feeling like I was watching the end of a story I never meant to be part of. Command called me in 2 days later, wanted to know what happened. I told them the truth, the version they'd understand, a hidden camp, civilian survivors, humanitarian escort. They accepted it, even commended me, wrote it up as a successful deviation, but they never asked how I found them, or who led me there. Back in my quarters, I opened the photo again. I studied the background, me, blurred, barely recognizable, but it was me. And that meant someone had been watching long before I noticed. Someone had kept this scrap of time, as proof of a moment that hadn't yet happened. I remembered the woman's eyes, the way she never begged, the way she stood like a gate. She hadn't saved her child, she'd saved me from something deeper than death. Donnelly came to see me one night, said he still heard the screams, asked if I did too. I didn't lie, I said yes. But I also told him what I'd learned, that the screams weren't always from pain. Sometimes they were echoes of warnings we ignored, ghosts shouting truths into deaf ears. He nodded, sat beside me. Neither of us spoke again that night. We didn't need to. We had both been rewired by the same silence. A month later, I left Korea. The war still raged, but my part in it was over. That's what they told me. Rotation complete. But wars don't end when you board a ship. They follow you, in your bones, in the way you flinch at laughter that's too loud, in the way you stare too long at doorways, waiting for someone who never speaks to appear. I carried the photo in my breast pocket, even in civilian clothes. It wrinkled with time, but I never let it go. Years passed. The nightmares faded, but the silence didn't. It would come suddenly, in the middle of dinner or walking through snow or holding my newborn daughter for the first time. That stillness, that hush, like something was watching, waiting, not to harm, but to remind. Remember the hill, remember her eyes, remember what you chose. And I did, every day. I visited the memorial for the war once, rows of names, flags, speeches. I didn't find my name, of course. But I left something behind anyway, a folded piece of cloth with a single strand of black hair knotted in its center. I placed it beneath a stone. No one saw me. I didn't need them to. It wasn't for them. It was for her, for the boy, for the child who gave me the photo, for the woman who never spoke but changed the course of everything. And now I tell you this, not because I want pity or medals. I tell you because someone has to remember, not the war, not the battles, but the moments between. The woman who pointed, the child who warned, the silence that saved us. That's the real story. The part that never makes it into books or speeches or brass plaques. The war after the war. The one inside. Because the truth is, not all heroes carry guns. And not all enemies wear uniforms. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stand still in a world that only knows how to run. And sometimes the loudest sound on a battlefield is no sound at all. They say war ends when the guns go silent, but I learned that silence is where it truly begins, the kind that follows you home, that fills your dreams, that waits for you in the mirror. I didn't return with scars on my skin. I returned with questions stitched into my bones, questions without answers, faces without names. A single moment, a woman's stillness, a child's warning, echoing louder than every explosion I ever survived. People ask what I learned over there. I tell them this: mercy is not weakness, listening is not surrender, and silence, when given freely, can be more powerful than any command barked in fury. That woman, she didn't speak my language. She didn't raise a hand, but she saved lives, changed destinies, and reminded me that humanity survives even in the deepest cracks of war. Not through force, through presence, through choice. So if you're still listening wherever you are, remember this: some stories are not meant to be told with medals and fanfare. Some are carried quietly, like cloth in a pocket or a photo in the dark. And in the end, they are the ones that change us most.